Thank you all for joining us at the October general meeting. Do we have any visitors with us this evening? I didn't see any names that I didn't recognize, but if you're visiting with us, let us know. I don't hear anybody, so let's go ahead and proceed. A little bit of background information. Our dues year just expired, and so we have several, or a handful of people, I should say, that did not renew. So right now we're looking at 55 active members of CapMac, several of which are honorary in thanks for the different people doing presentations to us in the past. What we got on the agenda tonight, I've got a few things to talk about business-wise and some announcements. Bill Oakley is going to do a product review looking at the iPhone 14 Pro versus the 13 with regards to camera. And then Shelly Brisbin is going to talk about accessibility features with iOS. But before we get to that, let's do our normal background. Our board, same as last time, and we're going to come back to the board here in a few minutes because tonight is nominations night for the 2023 board. We'll get to that though in a moment. So the board meets first Wednesday of every month. If you're interested ever in attending, let us know and we'll make sure we give you the Zoom connection information. We have a number of folks that have taken on different responsibilities beyond the elected officers. As most of you, I'm sure, are aware, we've been recording these meetings since we've been meeting by Zoom. And so we have, thanks to Robert and Bill, a very large YouTube library now of all of those past meetings. So if you want to go back and check on one that you missed, or check on it and see it again, or want to share it with somebody, refer them to our YouTube channel. Help desk goes on at every meeting, just like we did when we were meeting face-to-face, except now we're doing it via Zoom. If you drop or join the call anytime after 6:30, there was quite a bit of discussion about various things regarding browsers and the impact they might cause on a system. We typically have a technical discussion in the first 30 minutes of every meeting. So if you have a problem, that's a way for you to bring it up and see if our members can offer you some suggestions. If you have something you want to ask in between meetings, put it on Slack and we'll get it to the help desk team, or send an email to me or at president@capmac.org. and I will forward that to the help desk team as well. We've been doing coffee with CapMac now for a while. The next event is scheduled for Thursday, the 27th of October. It is already on the shared calendar. I'm going to be missing that myself, but Robert has volunteered to chair that meeting again, and thank him. I want to thank him for taking over this past coffee meeting in September. I was ill that day and had to call him at the last minute. So thank you very much for stepping in, Robert. A couple of things just in terms of general information I can share, and then we'll get on with some other, with the election. Some of the items I've come across looking at Apple this over the past month. This one shows the share in the audio market. So for the Apple speaker system, it is not the biggest, or doesn't have the largest share, but it is one of the larger vendors in the list of speaker providers. That frankly surprised me. I didn't realize that it was as big as it is. Although looking at this chart, it does sort of ignore some of the vendors. So, but still 22% is not a bad part of the market. We switched to iOS 16. I know I've updated my phone to iOS 16. Adoption rate seems to be going well. I hope others have adopted iOS 16 and haven't had any issues. Music streaming, again, Apple's a participant in that market. In that marketplace, they're pretty well even with the other major vendors. But it's still interesting that they're holding a significant share compared to the others. Global smartphone market share. I thought this was interesting, particularly with how many of the iPhone models are listed in the top 10 or top 8 that are listed here. So that just says Apple is doing a very good job in terms of selling their iPhones. And then lastly, looking at PC or system shipments, Apple doesn't ship as many as the others, but then I think we all knew that. They've always been around that 5 to 6% portion of the market, but they certainly address a different market share or portion of the market than many of the others do. So those were little slides of interest I came across in the last few days or since the last meeting. Before I get to that, let me take myself off of share here. And we have announced last time, our normal process in terms of our election is to have nominations at the October meeting, and then we'll have the election. So let me open the floor for nomination for our officers. Let me start off is there a nomination for president for the board for 2023?
Yeah, this is Bill, and I would just love if John Purvis would be our president one more time.
One more time. Okay.
Thank you, Bill. You did a great job.
Good. Yeah, could we make it for life?
Hey, just remember, you still secretary position could be a lifelong commitment too.
Yeah, maybe that's not such a good idea.
Yeah.
Are there any other nominations for president? Hearing none, let me proceed to vice president.
Let me nominate Nathan.
Thank you, Jim. Any other nominations? Very well. Now for treasurer, do we have a nomination?
I nominate Tom Weaver.
Thank you, Koki. Other nominations? Secretary. Now we can get back at Bill.
I nominate Bill O'Barr.
Thank you, Robert. Other nominations? Very well. Okay, and now we have our general spots on the board. So are there any nominations for those places?
I nominate Robert Frazier.
Other nominations?
I would nominate Jim Wynn.
Okay, so there we have two.
I nominate Koki Craig.
Koki. Any other nominations? All right, then we have had one person nominated for every slot available on our board for 2023. There will be a vote coming up, and we will be sending out the ballots to the membership. The board will be elected and will be sworn in at the December meeting. Thank you all for everyone's participation. Before we get on to tonight's program, does anyone have anything else to share? Tom, Tom, I know what you're going to say.
No, you don't.
Oh,
There was the London Mac user group meeting today. about 6 hours ago. And it was a surprise 80th birthday party for Nancy. A little over 2 years late, but her trip to the UK was a bit over 2 years late. And you have to understand, Nancy had never been out of the United States before. And she's been really looking forward to this for a long time. And then COVID and other things messed it up. She spent basically the last week in Scotland and got down to London. She was 2 hours late for her own surprise party. And we think it's because she tried to hire an Uber instead of a real London cab to get her to the meeting. So usually the London Mac user group meetings are about 2 hours, and she got there at about the end of 2 hours. So it drug on for another hour, and a bunch of people had to leave, unfortunately. But I am very pleased to report that about half the people in attendance were from CapMac. We really bowled them over. It was, I mean, it's the same people that are here at this meeting mostly. And it was really nice, and she was real surprised. And it was also a bunch of people that she'd worked with from the Mac Observer and other computer related jobs that Nancy's had in her writing career. So next item, the one that you thought about. Next year is our 30th anniversary for CapMac. And we have shirts and caps. The men's shirt is stone color with, oh yeah, I can't, what's the name of the blue? It's royal blue or something. And the women's shirts are royal blue with stone embroidery. And that's because of supply issues. We couldn't get both men's and women's the same color, but we could get them opposite. And the cap is stone with the blue logo on the cap. I will be sending out an email to every member with the prices and so forth. It's going to cost $1 or $1.50 more if you want to pay by credit card. That's just because that's the fee that that's charged by the credit card. And believe me, these prices are the absolute minimum that we can get them. Instead of a polo shirt, kind of like this with a nice pocket on it, these are button-down shirts. They are very nice. They're short sleeve with collars, both the men's and the women's. Terry has looked at one of them. We actually have one of the shirts here at the house. I picked it up today. And she says they run just a tad small. So women may want to order one size larger than you normally order. And this will be in the email. And some sizes are a little more expensive than others. And like I say, it's going to be a little less expensive. If you want to mail me a check, please mail the check to my home, not to the CapMac post office box. I only check there once a month because it's downtown, and the secretary that used to be available to check our post office box moved to San Antonio. Anyway, so I have to go down there once a month, and between the Capitol and the construction down there and all the UT stuff, there's been an intersection there that's been under construction for 2.5 years. You know the one I'm talking about, Bill.
Yeah.
And the traffic down there is just horrible. So I go early Sunday morning once a month. So if you mail the checks to me, we'll get shirts and we'll have them. Oh, and the other thing that's interesting is that CapMac Rewards is coming up, ends the end of November. Well, I'm gonna give you all a sneak peek of what's happening. Those with over 50 points are gonna get one of these hats.
Yay.
And those over 300 points will get both a shirt and a hat as their CapMac reward.
Great.
And there's other stuff also, some of which just arrived today here at the house. That's been for everybody over 50 points. So you've still got time to get points. So I'll have to get people's sizes and stuff. Anything else I'm supposed to report on, John?
I think that was it.
Oh, somebody else renewed their membership since the couple days ago at the board meeting. So
We're up to 56 now.
yeah, we're slowly climbing back. I think we may be to 57. I'd have to look.
Yeah, that's usually the case. We get a trickle effect after the September
Yeah.
1st.
And
Are
we
you-
get more in November, and then it kind of tapers off.
Are you gonna send an email so we know whether we renewed or not?
Oh, you've renewed. You've renewed. If you haven't gotten an email or a string of emails saying that you haven't renewed, that you're past due, then you're fine. We've got somebody that paid again anyway. They paid twice this year. And so they're a couple years ahead, but
All right, thank you, Tom. Okay, any other general announcements before we get to tonight's programs?
we do have to know what Shelly's cat's named.
His name is Norbert.
Norbert,
Norbert.
Norbert.
Norbert. Norbert.
Cool.
Okay, cool.
all right. So since Nathan is our VP and is in charge of doing our programming, let me
Yowzer.
turn this over to Nathan at this point so he can introduce Bill, who's going to talk about iPhone camera comparisons briefly, and then he'll go on and introduce our feature speaker. Nathan, take it away.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I want to introduce my uncle, Bill Oakey, who is going to be talking about the iPhone 14 camera and comparing it with the last model, iPhone 13 Pro. Please welcome Bill Oakey.
Okay, do I have permission to share the screen?
Yes.
Okay,
You by me, but. I vote
all
Kristen.
right, so. All right, so before I put the screen on that's gonna show you what I have to show you, let me just tell you, well, I'll go ahead and get it up there. Let's see here. Okay, so I call the iPhone 14 Pro the camera that also makes phone calls because it's absolutely incredible. I had last year's iPhone 13 Pro. Can everybody see my screen?
No. No, I
No.
cannot.
You see your face.
Yeah, we see your face, but that's it.
All right, hang on. Let me go back and hit share screen again. Okay. Share.
Ah,
There we go.
there's something's happening right now.
All right, now there's something on the screen that says my personal. I want to get rid of that. So I guess can I just close that?
Yeah.
Okay, now there we go. Now, can everybody see that?
No.
Yes.
I can.
Can you see where it says CapMac presentation?
Station,
iPhone-
yes.
Yes.
iPhone 14 Pro.
Yes, I can.
Can everybody else see it?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so let me talk about this a little bit first. I have a few, actually, I think I've only got a couple of them that compare the 13 Pro to the 14 Pro because they kind of got repetitious. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about each one of these, and I'm going to go ahead and in photos, I'm going to put the full screen up.
Full screen. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, the one on the left is the iPhone 13 Pro, and the one on the right is the iPhone 14 Pro. And if you look at the if you look at the top of the roof, you can see that the roof outline is a little bit sharper. It's kind of a subtle difference, but it's definitely there. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm,
now
yeah.
this one,
Oh,
this is a better example.
yeah.
I actually took this picture at night because the low light capabilities of both of these cameras are absolutely phenomenal. And just suffice it to say that if you had 20 of these, each one of them would show you a shade of difference between the 13 Pro and the 14 Pro. And I was actually very happy with the 13 Pro. But dadgummit, they keep making that camera better every year. And the only reason I even got a 14 Pro is because T-Mobile was having a special offer that if you switched, you could get a 14 Pro free if you had an 11, 12, or a 13. And so I had a 13, and so I think they're giving me $99 credit right away, and then they're going to they're giving me $500, $499 right away, and then they're going to prorate the rest of it over 24 months. So anyway, this is the end of my comparison thing, and we're going to go into just the 14 Pro. Now this picture was taken after it was completely dark outside, and this is actually a 3x zoom. I live in the middle unit of a triplex, and so it's actually quite a bit further away from that car, and it was as dark as it was ever going to get, and somehow the iPhone 14 Pro brings light in. How it does that, I have no earthly idea, but this is a 3x zoom of this picture from my looking at my parking lot from my sidewalk in the middle unit. And I took this 3x zoom picture after I had already gotten it onto my phone, and I did the finger thing to expand it further, and you can read that dadgum thing all the way. You can read that license plate number all the way from my sidewalk all the way down to the end of the sidewalk into the parking lot when it's so dark that I could barely even see the car, much less the license plate. I could barely see the car, and yet there it is. Now this one here is just I like one thing I like about the 14 Pro is the naturalness of the light under different lighting conditions. I have a lot more examples than this, but I didn't have time to put them all together. But if you'll notice, that's a beautiful shot of what that pot of flowers looks like at night. And you can see the lights in the windows and everything. Everything just looks so natural. Okay, now this is the one that totally boggles my mind. I was staying at the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Las Vegas, and I had my 14 Pro, and I stepped out onto the balcony. So this apartment, this condo tower here has a bunch of lighted windows in it. And you can see in the background, you can see two other towers, and those are pretty clear. Well, I will tell you that this one on the left is a 3x zoom. And what I did was I took the photograph, and then I zoomed it in even further, and believe it or not, you can actually look into these rooms, and you'll see a piece of artwork on the wall here. And by the way, it was dark at night. It was probably close to midnight, totally dark. The one on the right, you can actually see the door handle on the room, on the other side of the room from the window. And you're starting with a 3x zoom to begin with, and I wish I'd had the original picture without any zoom at all to show you how far away I was from that apartment building. This boggles my mind. Out of all the samples that I have from the 14 Pro, this one literally boggles my mind.
Yeah.
Now, I would not recommend people do this on a regular basis because you might turn into a peeping Tom. If there had been any people in here, I would have completely deleted them, even if they had all their clothes on, because I don't like the idea. And my sister was horrified when I sent her this. She says, "Oh my God, that camera will see into people's rooms." And I said, "Yeah, I guess it will." And that's not why I was doing it. I was doing it to test the camera. But yeah, it will actually do that. But I just can't. I'm a photographer. I do photos for art shops. I've been in a lot of art shows around town over the years, since early 2000s, I guess. And so photography is real important to me, and I have a lot of experience with photography. And normally, I have a pocket-sized Panasonic camera with a Leica lens on it that's several years old, and they don't even make the particular model that I have anymore, but it has something like an f1.7 lens on it, which is awfully darn good for low light photography. And of course, the lens is several times bigger than the one on these iPhones. But I have no idea how the engineers who developed this camera were able to bring in that much light and that much detail from that much distance. And they just keep getting better every year. I think maybe somebody can correct me on this, but a few years ago, they were working exclusively with Sony on their camera technology. Are they still working with Sony, or are they working with somebody else now?
I don't know.
Bill,
Yeah.
were these photos that we're currently looking at handheld or on a tripod?
Yeah, that's another thing. I had no tripod with me in Las Vegas. And so what I did was I tried to rest my arms on the balcony, but you know, the wind was blowing. It's kind of hard to really steady yourself, especially if you're 75 years old, to steady yourself completely by just trying to brace your arms on something or whatever. So no, there was no tripod on this. And that's another thing, because it'll tell you, a little message will come on the screen and tell you to hold still, because these pictures take several seconds. You press the shutter and it's automatically in night mode, so you're waiting several seconds before it finishes the shot. And so that's all the more. You try doing this with an ordinary camera, and good luck. It's just not going to happen for you, because I've had so many different models of cameras over the years, and the thing that made me realize how good the latest iPhones are was a few iPhone generations ago, like maybe 5 generations ago. I think I had the iPhone XS Max, and I love taking pictures of people's houses lit up for Christmas, you know, the outdoor Christmas lights. And my God, I have never owned a camera that took more natural looking. There's no blur, there's no, you know, as long as you're not a block away from it. If you're standing right in front of the house and you take a picture with your iPhone, it's the recent model iPhone, especially a Pro or a Max or whatever, it's gonna look the same as what your eyes are telling you. And the shades, the hues, the tones, all that stuff keeps getting better and better and better. Okay, so now we're going to move on just to exclusively the 14 Pro with no comparisons. This one came out blurry, and I don't know why it did. I must have done something wrong, but this is an example of an iOS 16 feature that I was not aware of. I kind of discovered it by accident. And I asked Nathan about it, and he said, "Oh, that's a new feature of iOS 13." iOS 16, I apologize. So what this is I have a flower pot in my front yard, just to the left of the sidewalk. And I've been hoping to get some photographs from these flowers, these close-ups in macro mode with the iPhone 14 Pro. And I was hoping I could get some shots that I could maybe use in an art exhibit. And what happens is, if you take your finger and you tap and hold at the edge of a flower, notice how there's a white outline. Can you sort of see the white outline around the edges that's over in this lower right-hand corner? That outline goes around the entire flower. And then you'll see a little dialogue thing that says copy, right? That's it right there. So you tap on copy, and it will pull the flowers out of a photograph, so that all you have is the flower. And that was a feature of very expensive software for many years, and it didn't always work right. You had to try over and over again to get it exactly right. I had Photoshop, and it had this kind of feature in it. So I felt like, hey, I'm off and running, because, well, I'll show you in a minute. this turned out to be one of my favorites. As soon as I saw this shot, there's something about the shading, the shadows in the petals on that flower that made me think that I could really do something with this photo. So there it is with that iOS 16 copy thing where you hold you tap and hold around the edges of the petals, and as soon as you start to see a little flashing outline around the flower that lights up and blinks a little bit, and you'll see a little dialogue says copy. When you copy this, you can paste it into an email, which is what I did, so I could just email it to myself. And so you have a nice cutout of the flowers. Okay, the last picture of my presentation, something I'm really proud of, is several years ago, a Google startup company called Vida, and that's spelled VIDA, sent me an email and they said, we've seen some of your artwork on Facebook and we'd like to know if you would be interested in designing women's clothing for our new Google startup called Vida. And so I went on there and I uploaded the design and put it on a scarf, and I put the same design on a sleeveless top, and they accepted me as an artist, and I did one abstract design that came from a photograph, and for some reason I got busy with other projects and did not get back to it. I sold a bunch of the scarves. Christine Gilbert, who's a CapMac member who's here tonight, has my sleeveless top, and I'm always surprised when I see her wearing it. But the last picture I'm going to show you is how I decided I could take advantage of this feature in iOS 16 that lets you get a cutout of something. That is a couch pillow cover that is available for sale right now on the Vida website, and I think it's cool. I wouldn't mind having one of these myself. So there's all kinds of interesting possibilities for what you can do, with the iPhone 14 Pro camera that also happens to make phone calls and do some other things. And if you have any artistic inclinations, you can go to town with the new features in iOS 16. And I'll tell you, I have barely learned I haven't had time yet to learn how to use all the features in iOS 16. So let me see if I can exit.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill. And now I would like to welcome our main speaker for tonight, Ms. Shelly Brisbin. She is an author of iOS Access for All, a prolific podcaster on the Relay.fm network and many other shows. And I would just like everyone to give us a warm welcome to Shelly Brisbin.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Hello. Thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it. And I am going to need to share the screen in a second. I've got some slides for you. We're going to talk about accessibility in iOS, and I'm happy to take questions at the end, and we can talk about accessibility on other platforms from Apple too, but this is basically geared around iOS. So if I could share the screen, that would be great. Well, thank you so much again for having me and for putting up with a few technical difficulties, which hopefully are behind us now. So this is a little bit about me. I do a lot of things. It's not so much that I'm an overachiever, it's that I'm insecure that something will fall through. So I always need a backup plan. My day job is as a producer reporter for a radio show here in town, Texas Standard. If you listen to your Texas public radio station, you'll find us at 10 a.m. every weekday morning. So check us out. It's a pretty cool news show, and I love doing that work. I also write iOS Access for All, which is my book about accessibility for iOS. And the 10th anniversary of that book is this year, iOS 16 version, not quite out yet, but it's coming in November. And then as Nathan mentioned, I do some podcasts. I do Parallel, which is about accessibility. And then I'm on a podcast called Mac Accessibility Roundtable, which is about accessibility and the Mac platform. And just a bunch of other things. I can't stop sitting in front of microphones. It's just a sickness that I have. So that's what I do. So here's what we're going to talk about tonight. I want to give you sort of an overview of the accessibility features within iOS. I don't know what your background might be. Some of you might know about some of these features and some of you might know none of them. But I want to sort of start with the basics of what you get with accessibility for iOS. And then we want to talk about some of what's new. And then sort of put accessibility for this platform in context. What does it mean? And what do I want you to understand about accessibility, which is our tools for folks with disabilities that some of us can use whether we have a disability or not, but even if they aren't necessarily the features that we specifically use ourselves, it's kind of helpful to have an understanding of the role that they play in our world and how you can actually help make things more accessible. And then I'm going to leave some time for questions. So I'm going to look at my watch now, and forgetting the technical difficulties, I will pull to a stop and leave you an opportunity to ask questions if you have them, as well as give you links to all the stuff on that first slide later in the presentation. So the iOS Accessibility Suite, it's organized by kinds of disability, or that's the way I like to think of it. There are features that sort of overlap, and we'll talk a little bit about those and how they interconnect. But it's helpful to think about accessibility in terms of the kinds of disabilities that iOS provides assistance for. iOS accessibility features began in 2009 with the iPhone 3GS and iOS 3, was it 4? Oh, God, I can't even remember anymore. It's been so long. Anyway, it was the iPhone 3GS, and VoiceOver was one of the first features and is sort of the fundamental accessibility feature in iOS. It's a screen reader, which allows a person who's blind or visually impaired to hear the interface to iOS spoken, as well as to hear content spoken. And VoiceOver is the name of the screen reader on all of the Apple platforms. It moved to Mac it had been on Mac before it was on iOS, actually. And then it came to the watch and to Apple TV. And so any time you hear about VoiceOver, that is Apple's screen reader. And screen readers are on other mobile and desktop platforms, but this is the Apple iteration of it. And that's kind of the main feature that people with blindness and low vision, people with blindness who can't see the screen at all tend to use. There are a couple of other features that we'll get into when we get to what's new, because Apple has created this category of features called detection features that make it possible for certain high-end iPhones with LiDAR sensors to actually know what's going on in the environment and give that information to people with blindness or low vision. And so there's one feature that exists already called people detection, but we'll get to door detection, which is a new iOS 16 feature a little later. And then description, which is kind of part of VoiceOver, or recognition is what I should really have called it here, because there are description and recognition features. And we'll get to those too, but those are about, again, sort of describing what's in the environment for somebody who's blind or blind. Low vision features, these are the ones that you might actually have encountered yourself most often if you need to magnify, if you need to make text bigger, if you need to magnify the screen, if you've ever used pinch to zoom, anything you've ever done to make the iPhone or iPad screen easier to see is in the low vision suite. You can also use speech with even if you have low vision and you can see your phone, there might be some instances in which you would like your phone to talk to you. And that's incorporated in the low vision features that I'm going to talk about too. For hearing impaired folks, and again, this is for somebody who has a significant hearing loss or somebody who is finding that they need to wear hearing aids than they didn't before. My sister, who's younger than I am, she's in her 50s, was recently prescribed a hearing aid. And so I became newly aware that it is not just people who have profound hearing losses and have had it for a while. You also may find that things like captioning, whether it be the live captions feature that we'll talk about that's new, or the HDR captions are something that's helpful to you, even if you don't have like a permanent disability. It's often as we get older, vision and hearing, we need a little help. Physical and motor, this is for folks who may have difficulty touching the iPhone or have difficulty making the swipe and flick and tap gestures. And so there are lots of features within iOS that make it easier to do those things. Some of them are sort of little assistant type features that for sticky keys, so that it's easier to tap keys without unintentionally causing things to happen. And some things are as profound as something like switch control, which allows somebody who cannot physically touch the iOS device at all to use switches to control it. And we'll get to that a little bit later too. So there's a wide array of features in this accessibility suite. for folks with variety of disabilities. So let's talk about blindness related features in VoiceOver. So VoiceOver is a screen reader. If your iPhone, you're familiar with the Siri voice, probably. VoiceOver it goes many steps beyond Siri in the sense that VoiceOver will read everything from what's on your home screen to your notifications to what's on a web page. And it does so with a set of alternative gestures. So for example, you would double tap instead of tapping in order to cause something to happen with VoiceOver. And that's so that you can run your finger across the screen and hear the contents of the screen without causing something to happen. Obviously, if you did that without VoiceOver, you'd be opening apps all the time. You wouldn't want to do that. So VoiceOver uses a series of alternative gestures and a tool called the rotor, which is a little dial interface that allows you to, it's essentially like an old analog TV tuner type dial, where you take your two fingers and you rotate the rotor, and then you swipe up or down to activate certain actions. So it's a really clever interface mechanic that Apple put in there. And these things have been in, again, quite some time. We haven't even gotten to the new stuff yet. This is just sort of the basics of how VoiceOver works. And it's quite a robust interface. You can control the rate of speech. You can control, you can obviously choose which voice you want to use. You can control the pitch. You can control what is in the rotor, so what's available to you with that dial interface I was talking about. And VoiceOver continues to grow in terms of the ways it allows you to interact with the iPhone interface. Also, when Apple does things like take away the home button, so that now we have to flick up to get access to things, flick down to get the control center, or flick up to go back to the home screen. There are alternative VoiceOver gestures that people can use to get there, which meant that there are a lot, as an aside, there are a lot of blind people who weren't particularly thrilled when the home button went away, because it was a little less challenging to use the home button. But I think most of us have kind of figured out the VoiceOver flicks. And one of the things I tried to do in the book is sort of explain that as a little easier as time goes along, and as more people are sort of getting used to it. VoiceOver description, I mentioned a little bit before, there are three kinds of VoiceOver description, and this is to give you an enhanced picture of what's going on around you. So image description, if you encounter an image, and this can be either in camera or in photos, or it can be an image on a web page or on Twitter or something like that. If you have image description enabled with VoiceOver turned on, iOS tries to tell you what's in the image. So you might be out front of your house and it might say, red car on a gravel road. That's one of my favorite ones. I don't live on a gravel road, but there was a red car across the street. And so anyway, so sometimes it's not completely accurate, but it's close enough that you do get some sort of sense of what's going on in your world. And so a blind person might use that to get a general gauge on their surroundings, or you can point it at objects and it will say, you know, it's finding, there's on this table, there's a keyboard, there's a mouse, there's a laptop. And it can be comical. Sometimes it makes mistakes, but it's also extremely useful if you have zero information and you'd like to get a little bit of information about your environment. And you know, Apple will tell you, don't rely on this for your life, but do trust it to give you some sense of what's going on around you. Text recognition. There, as you probably know, if you spend any time on social media, there's a lot of text out there in the world that's actually contained within images. You've seen Twitter posts that are essentially screenshots. So you have text that you're supposed to read, but it's an image. Well, if you're a blind person, you can't use VoiceOver to read that image the way you would use it to read the text on a Twitter post. So text recognition OCRs that text. There are all sorts of different ways and means of OCRing text in iOS, and we can talk about that. But text description is basically around to give you information about the text in your environment or on that social media post, and tells you, hey, let me read that tweet to you. It's because it's an image. Screen recognition is an interesting one. This is one where it would probably be really great if I had my demo all set up. But in order to work with VoiceOver, apps must be made VoiceOver compatible. It's not difficult for apps to do it, but not every developer does it. And so many times you'll encounter an app that is VoiceOver accessible, which means it will read all the menus and the buttons and all the interface items as well as the content. But sometimes you run across an app that just is not VoiceOver accessible. And if, as a VoiceOver reader, instead of hearing menu home, share, all the things that you might see as titles of a menu or a button. You'll hear button, 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 button. It's the bane of a voiceover user's existence, let me tell you, because you have no idea what those buttons are. So screen recognition using AI and machine learning is designed to try and interpret what those things are that you encounter. For example, back button, the arrows that point left almost always have the same interface. So if you have an app that doesn't have that back button properly labeled for voiceover, screen recognition, if it's turned on, and again, you have to turn these on to use them with voiceover, screen recognition will try and interpret, and it'll say probably back button or maybe back button or something like that. So it's not perfect again, but it's a way for a voiceover user to get more information than they would have from an inaccessible app. The demo I always use for this is I love RSS feeds because I'm old apparently, but I use them a lot, and I have an app I like called Reader. Reader is not voiceover compatible, and I am not a daily voiceover user. I can and do use it all the time for the book and for reading things, but I can live without it. But I can't recommend it to my blind friends because it isn't voiceover accessible, and there's nothing more annoying than recommending a non-voiceover accessible app to your blind friend and having them come back to you and go, hello, what have you done to me? The last one I want to talk about is detection. Again, people detection is something that came in iOS 15, and door detection is new in iOS 16. People detection was Apple's first foray into a feature that is an accessibility focused feature, but it depended on the availability of a LiDAR sensor. So this is only in the iPhone 13 Pro, 13 Pro Max, and now the 14 Pro and Pro Max, and then the iPad Pros that have LiDAR. And so with LiDAR equipped, with a LiDAR equipped device, the magnifier app has this thing called people detection, where you can, with magnifier open, point your phone, your camera at your environment, and it will identify where there is a person in the environment and how far away they are from you. Well, why is that useful? During the pandemic, it was very useful for social distancing. You could find out if you were in fact 6 feet away from somebody. You could also, if you're getting on a bus or a train, find out whether somebody's in that seat next to you if you're blind. Find out whether you're standing appropriately in line, that sort of thing. And Apple has extended detection with something called door detection that we'll get to when we talk about new features in iOS 16. So low vision, this is kind of my favorite because I'm a low vision person myself, and I use a lot of these features in real life. And again, some of these are ones that you might encounter yourself if your eyes are not as young as they used to be. And you may not use all of them, or you may use them, as I do, in combination. There's a whole category of screen magnification features. There's Zoom, which is a feature that will magnify the entire screen or a windowed portion of the screen. This is available on Mac OS 2. Then there's also a feature you might have encountered called display zoom, which basically blows up the whole iPhone screen, but still allows you to see the full screen. You're not zoomed in such a way that you have to scroll in order to see the rest of the screen. And it's not a huge magnification, but it's a little bit of a boost. So if you don't feel like zoom is something you need because zoom is in too much, a display zoom is kind of a way, especially with a big phone screen, but where text might still be a little small for you, you can use display zoom. And then pinch to zoom, you've probably all used it on a web page or in mail, in photos, any place where any app that supports pinch to zoom will let you quickly zoom in with your fingers and see more detail about whatever there is. And I have a confession to make. Every once in a while when I'm reading a print book, I want to pinch to zoom it, and it doesn't work, and it's really weird. So there are other features within the low vision suite that allow you to enlarge text. You may have heard of dynamic type. If an app supports dynamic type, it doesn't mean that the app has large text by default. It means that if you have large text setting sizes enabled on your phone, they're both standard, they're both like regular large text sizes, and then larger ones, which are called accessibility text sizes. But if an app supports dynamic type, it means that if you've turned that text size up, the relative size of the text you're reading will be greater. So for example, my mother, who has macular degeneration, I have her text sizes turned way up so that both her text messages and her email have extremely large type. Some apps that support dynamic type won't give you the large size. They'll give you, it's relative. It's relative to other sizes, and it's relative to whatever the app developer has chosen. But supporting dynamic type means that you do get some benefit from turning on those larger text sizes, because not every app supports it. And again, if you're somebody who uses dynamic type, who appreciates this because text on your iPhone is too small to read, you will find that some apps just don't support it. The Twitter client and Twitterific are my favorite Twitter apps that do support it. I think Tweetbot, which a lot of people like, doesn't. I like to rag on Tweetbot because they're not very accessible and it makes me unhappy. But Apple's apps are, as usual, and in almost all cases, this didn't used to be true, but in almost all cases, when I talk about these features that require the developer to support the app, Apple has done a really good job of supporting it, as you might imagine. It wasn't true in the beginning, because when these accessibility features came, some of the apps, and even that Apple was producing, didn't have full support. Like I think for a long time, weather didn't really do very well with dynamic type. Now it does fine. So obviously Apple is the safest bet if you want a feature, if you want an app that supports something like dynamic type. But if you need dynamic type, be aware that you're not always going to get support for it. And then bold text is just another example of, it's a toggle, and it makes the text look a tiny bit bolder. And one of the things I do in my book is I show examples of bold versus not bold, because you can't always tell. Like it's not like when you are in Word and you decide you're going to turn your text bold and you can say, oh, well, that's bold and this other text, that's much bolder than the other text. Sometimes it's only slightly bolder. And then there is the magnifier app, which used to be kind of a hard thing to get to. You had to go through accessibility shortcut to get to it. And the fact that I said that and you were like, wait, what's accessibility shortcut? You haven't explained that. That's the point. Magnifier was hard to find. Now it is, in fact, an app. You can put it in your control center. You can summon it via Siri. But basically, it turns your iPhone or iPad into a magnifying glass. And you can use it to look at something very small, like tiny text, or something that you may be trying to work with a tool or something, or you can point it some distance away and you can look at signage if you're visually impaired maybe, and you want to see a street sign, or you want to see a menu on a wall or something like that. So magnifier does both of those. It's also where these detection features that I was talking about, people detection and door detection, are. So it's kind of a weird hybrid in that you tell a person who's blind, who wouldn't have any use for a magnifier of any kind, to say, well, if you want to use these detection features, you need to go into the magnifier app. But the magnifier app basically is a camera interface. And it does another nice thing, which people with disabilities for a long time have been able, who are blind or low vision, have been able to buy these electronic magnifiers that have color filters that make it possible to get much higher contrast as well as much larger text. And magnifier has some of those features as well. So a lot of those little handheld magnifiers you used to buy for a visually impaired person so that they could, read more effectively, are kind of obsolete, because the iPhone magnifier, which keeps getting better every time, it now exists. There are obviously other magnifier apps out there, but magnifier has slowly, and I think it was iOS 13 or 14, maybe it was 12, I don't know, it sort of slowly gotten better and as a more useful feature, and Apple keeps adding stuff to it. So there's so much low vision stuff. Color and contrast, we'll just go over this really quickly, but there are things you can do to make the interface items in iOS pop a little bit more. There's one called button shapes and one called labels that just make it easier for people to see the low contrast. This all started back in iOS 7, when, if you were around iOS back that far, and they got rid of all the skeuomorphism and they made everything really bright white, and it was just a disaster for people with low vision. And so I point that out only because a lot of these features that specifically make it easier for a low vision person to see stuff with high contrast, which is what a lot of folks need who have low vision, a lot of that stuff sort of stems from that iOS 7 period. And so if there's something that's difficult for you to see in iOS, then these are the features under accessibility and vision that you might want to look to. And taming the visual interface, there's another thing that I talk about in the book a lot is keyboards, because when you use some of these features that make it easier to see the screen, because the contrast pops a little bit, reduce white point and increase contrast and white balance and those sorts of things, that also makes keyboards easier to see, because there's 2 or 3 different color schemes for keyboards in iOS. And so you might find it challenging if you're low vision to see some of those keyboard combinations. And so I suggest how people can set those interface features so that they can more easily see the keyboard. Speech is a low vision. This is one of my favorite ones. So you might not be a voiceover user. You might not be totally blind or blind enough that you are unable to see your iOS interface, but you might want, for example, the content, your web page or an article that you're reading on your phone. You might find it easier to have that read to you. Maybe Zoom is too slow, or it doesn't zoom in enough, or you want to rest your eyes. So there are several features within the low vision suite that make it possible to read the whole screen aloud, read the selected text, read a web page. There are also a lot of apps that do this, but this is really nice because you get all of the advantages of VoiceOver in terms of support for a lot of languages and a lot of voices, but you can invoke it at will and turn it off at will. And I do this a lot. Speak Screen is one of my favorites, which it's a little feature where, so if I'm reading a long article, I can, with it Speak Screen invoked, and it's just there in the background, it's not doing anything until I need it. I take 2 fingers and I flick down from the top of the screen, and it'll just read the screen to me. It'll read the page to me. So I use it for, as I say, long articles, web pages, that sort of thing. So again, it uses the sort of underpinnings of VoiceOver, but you don't have to have it turned on, and you don't have to have a lot of gestures memorized, just a couple. So, and I think, seeing how long I'm going here, I think after the next couple of slides, I'm going to stop and see if you have any questions before we get to the new stuff, because I've thrown a lot of things at you. So we're going to talk about hearing access, and then we're going to talk about physical and motor access. Then I'm going to stop for a little bit, see if you have any questions. So as I said, there are a lot of instances in which you might use some of these features, even if you are not somebody with a profound hearing loss. Obviously, if you have a hearing aid that you can use with the iPhone, Apple has created a program whereby it certifies hearing aids that support iOS, or that are supported by iOS. And those are, it's going to be interesting. And just because the government has made it, is allowing over-the-counter hearing aids as of this month, October. And it'll be interesting to see whether any of those hearing aids actually have good iOS support. I don't know very much about hearing aids. I don't use them, but I'm really curious to see whether some hearing aids, as you might know, are kind of pricey. And it'll be interesting to see whether the sort of theoretical reduction in the cost of hearing aids actually has any benefits for people who are iOS users. There are other hearing related features, like turning, instead of having an audible alert, you can have an LED flash. So any device, most iPads now and all iPhones have a flash, so that you can, when your phone rings, have it flash instead of, or if you get a text message, any sort of alert, instead of having a sound, or in addition to it, having a sound if you wish. And then also vibration. What a lot of people don't know is that you can set your phone on vibrate. You can also create custom vibrations. So just as you can create a ringtone for your sister or your mom or your kid, you can also create custom vibrations. You can either choose them from a long list, just the way you can ringtones, or you can essentially draw a vibration on the screen. So if you want your sister to be ... you can basically draw it on the screen and create a custom vibration, which is kind of helpful to folks who might like the benefit of individualized ringtones, but can't necessarily hear them, but they can feel the vibration. And then live listen is a really cool one. If you have AirPods, you can actually turn your phone into a microphone and say, let's say you're in a busy restaurant and you're sitting with your friend and you can't hear them very well. Well, you put in your AirPods and you put the phone on the table and you point the microphone at them and enable live listen. And then you can hear what they're saying through your AirPods, because the iPhone is acting as a microphone. So that's sort of an ad hoc hearing device that a lot of people enjoy. And then also TTY, RTT support. It's kind of old timey. Back in the day, there were these TTY machines that deaf people had to use to connect to other deaf folks, or to businesses that had support for deaf users. And that's all kind of moved. We're all using text now. We don't really need the machines anymore, but Apple supports a text-based or phone-based TTY system. So you don't have to have those old style devices, but that support remains in the iPhone. And then finally, captioning, support for ADR captioning, and as of iOS 16, which we'll talk about, live captioning, which is a really cool feature that I really want to get to. And we'll talk about that in a second. Last but not least, physical and motor. Again, if you are somebody who has difficulty touching the iPhone or difficulty making the gestures that you need to do so, these features have varying levels of accommodation. So sticky keys is a good example where, like, let's say I have trouble striking the iPhone key on the virtual keyboard, and I have trouble striking it hard enough, or maybe I strike it too hard. Sticky keys slows things down and makes it easier for you if you have a motor delay to strike the key and have your strike be effective. And then there are a number of other features that have to do with timing. How long does it take for the strike of the key to take effect? And then there's some features to do with mice and pointers. So if you connect a mouse or a trackpad to your iPad, you probably know that these features continue to be enhanced by Apple as an iPad OS. And we know that iPad OS 16 isn't quite out, but there aren't really a ton of enhancements for that. But there's some accessibility specific mice and pointer things that allow you to slow down the track speed, or allow you to lean a little heavier on the trackpad if you need to, on the button in order to activate the mouse. Also, you can increase the size of the mouse cursor. There are just various ways you can kind of make it a little more comfortable for you for an accessibility user. You might have heard of back tap. This is basically where you can double tap or triple tap the back of your iPhone and assign or iPad and assign a command to it. It could be a shortcut. It could be something like Open Control Center. You could call Siri. So if there's something that you do a lot, and maybe it's intended for somebody who might have difficulty making notifications. Or Control Center is a good example of that, because if somebody, maybe they can tap okay, but they can't necessarily swipe down effectively, or you swipe and oh crap, I got the search when I meant to get Control Center. Well, you could use a back tap, a double tap or a triple tap for that function, or like I say, a shortcut. And so you have two choices there. You can do a double tap one and a triple tap one, and that makes it easy to use an app switcher and any frequently used command that you might find difficult to do. And then the last few things on physical and motor, switch control is, excuse me, switch control, like VoiceOver, is kind of a comprehensive interface in that what you're doing with switch control is you're connecting, in large part, physical switches to your device. Excuse me for a second. Pardon me. You're connecting physical switches. They're usually Bluetooth or USB switches. So it may be for somebody who can push a button, but who can't necessarily swipe, or again, pull down Control Center, or access iOS features in the way you typically would. But they can program these switches to allow them to do this. So you have USB or Bluetooth switches. Often these are essentially rigged. So you might have somebody who uses a wheelchair and they have their iPad mounted on a stand and a series of switches that are configured to allow them to control the iPhone. And so again, maybe they can press the button. The switch has a single function. Maybe the switch is a tap. Maybe the switch is a left swipe. Maybe the switch is a right swipe. And they have this rig full of switches. It's kind of an amazing thing. But you can also now, and this came in iOS 15, and I was kind of amazed by this. There are a lot of people who are verbal who cannot touch the iPhone. So now you can program a switch to a vocal sound. So if I can make the k sound or the s sound, but I can't necessarily touch the device, I can program commands that support those sounds. So k might be Control Center, or s might be swipe, whatever choices that I make. And the device learns the way you make the sound, and then you tell it what you want that sound to represent. So switch control is a cool feature for somebody who perhaps wasn't able to use an iPhone in the past. And then the last couple, assistive touch, again, is for somebody who has some ability to gesture with the iPhone, but what it does is it presents a visual menu on your screen. It's a grid, and you can press a button and that'll get you to Siri or to the Control Center or to App Switcher or whatever you program it to do. And so for somebody who has difficulty making compound gestures, that's a more straightforward way to work. And then lastly, voice control basically gives you the ability to control the interface of your phone with your voice. You can issue command. There are apps that now support it. Used to be, it was just sort of an Apple thing, and you could say, open mail, open messages. So it's a little like Siri in the sense that you can do those sorts of things, but you can also do more complex things. You can dictate text and do complicated things with it. You can, select whole sentences or words or lines and delete and manipulate them. It has a numbers-based grid, so you can have it take action on a part of the screen based on the number that corresponds to that part of the screen. That's more of a Mac thing. Voice control is on the Mac too. but you can do it in iOS as well. So it's a powerful interface for somebody who can't touch the device, but who is verbal enough to use voice control. So let me stop there, have a big old drink of water, and see if you guys have any questions before we get to what's new in iOS 16. All right, hearing none. Well, let's talk about what's new. So as I mentioned,
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm not quite sure how to ask this. We've seen quite a number of features that are available to people that have disabilities. I just wonder, how does one who might, for instance, have a visual disability actually set the phone up to help themselves do the things that it can do for visually handicapped people? I mean, they can't see the phone to set it up, can they? Or,
That's
how do
a
they
really
do that?
good question. Actually, you can't. You can set up the phone using accessibility features. So if you have a brand new iPhone, when it, you get the screen that says hello in multiple languages, one of the things it actually does is it lets you know that there is an accessibility menu, and I forget what the language it uses is, but basically it says punch this button here, and then we can set up accessibility features before we do anything else. So it will turn on voiceover for you if you need it. It will turn on invert colors if you need it, whatever combination of features. I'm not sure whether you can set up a phone with switch control, but you can certainly do it with voiceover. And that is not something that's always been true. I think for the past 2 or 3 versions of iOS, though, basically what it lets, and the Mac is the same way. In fact, and I know that this is the case because I've seen it, that when you brand new install a Mac, it basically tells you, hey, there's this thing called voiceover. If you want to invoke it, do Command F5 and you get to, and it'll start you, and it'll actually teach you how to use it. And that is actually one of the biggest challenges. And so when I talk about how to set up a new phone in my book, one of the things I did was I introduced voiceover gestures before even people were setting up their phone, because the setup process is accessible. But if for somebody who's got a brand new phone and who might not have ever used it, they need to kind of know what a double tap is and what a swipe is, and how those gestures differ from the standard gestures, maybe if they had sight and they lost it. So that's the one weakness of the setup process. But if you've used a phone before, and if you've used voiceover before, it is completely possible to set up a phone in a fully accessible way if you're blind.
That was one of the features that my husband really liked about the Apple products, is he could go into an Apple store and turn on any of the issues, and he was totally blind, and he could go in at any Apple store and start using the computer.
I've done that many times. I've walked into an Apple store, just turned on voiceover. Sometimes I do it for fun, but sometimes I actually do it because
he
I
did too.
And actually,
going to turn that off, and he said, no, it's too fun.
They'll figure it out.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Well, let's talk about some of the new things in iOS 16. So a number of the things that are new for accessibility are powered by AI and by machine learning, which means that for a while there was kind of a split between devices that could have most of these features and not. But now we've got to the point where in order to support iOS 16, you almost have to have a phone that is capable of doing most of this stuff. And I mentioned that because the LiDAR features that I talked about before, that I'll talk about a little bit more in a bit, do require a phone that has LiDAR, the detection features. But most of these other ones, with the possible exception of the iPhone 8, I'm not entirely sure about image detection and some of those things with the iPhone 8, but most of these AI features are now supported on all of the devices. And what I mean by that is that the phone's machine learning is making it possible for it to do the interpretation and then tell you what's going on. So the image description I described before, the text description, text recognition, the machine learning is going out there and saying, okay, this is data, and I'm going to turn this data into speech so that the blind person can use it. In the case of iOS 16, door detection is an AI-based feature. Customized sound recognition, which we'll talk about in a bit, is an AI-based feature. And so what I love about these things is that they kind of point the way. They're kind of proofs of concept for what Apple is doing overall. And people think maybe Apple at some point will do glasses or a headset of some kind. That headset thing is far more likely than maybe, but a lot of people, including blind people, would love to see Apple do some sort of glasses that would provide them the ability to navigate independently. And the technology that's going to make those things possible is kind of being prototyped in the accessibility suite, because something like people detection that I described before is the same kind of tech that you're going to have if you're going to have glasses or headset that interpret an environment for you, or that create an AR or an AI experience for you. And so I love looking at the AI features and saying, hey, what is that going to mean for not only people with disabilities, but for everybody out there who wants to, interact more directly with their phone and use these machine learning things. New voices. This is for voiceover specifically, but iOS 16 added a whole bunch of languages, 20 new languages for voiceover, including Ukrainian, which a lot of people pointed out recently, but also a number of English language voices. There's a group called, there's a company called Code Factory that makes a series of voices called Eloquence. And these voices are really well known to screen reader users in the Windows world who use a screen reader called JAWS or a screen reader called NVDA. And blind folks love these voices. And the reason they do is that a blind person typically listens to speech on their device really, really fast. You get very good at listening to speech extremely fast. And to you and I who don't use it every day, it might sound kind of robotic and hard to understand, but that's how they're using their device. They're speaking almost as fast as they can think. And Eloquence voices are optimized for really, really fast speech. And so if I use Alex, which is a voiceover voice that's really well regarded, if I use that at 60 or 65%, the same voice not the same voice, but a voice in Eloquence, I might be able to use it 85%, so significantly faster. I also like to talk about Eloquence voices because there's a Shelly in there. It doesn't have to be the voice I use, but I'm glad to be represented. So more settings groupings. This is another interesting thing that people always ask me what I want in accessibility, either personally or just the way I'd like to see it go. Well, there are a ton of accessibility settings, and you're going to use them in whatever combination makes sense to you based on your disability, based on tweaks that you might make. Just like when you get a new iPhone, you're going to customize the settings for your ringtones and your privacy settings and all the things that are important to you. And I've always believed that it would be great if those settings were groupable, not only that they would be transferable via iCloud if you wanted them to, but that they were groupable, and you could say, well, these are Shelly's settings. These are all the things that I want for every device I have. That hasn't quite happened for us, but we're getting more of that in accessibility in the sense that VoiceOver has something called activities where you can, and commands, but activities allows you to group some VoiceOver settings together. So you can say, I want this voice, I wanted this speech rate, I want this level of verbosity, I want this combination of features together. And it might be based on a task I'm doing. It might be I'm programming, or I'm writing, or I'm reading. And so I want a set of settings that matches the thing that I'm doing. In iOS 16, those have come to Magnifier. And remember, I mentioned that in Magnifier, not only can you change how much you zoom in an iOS, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, but you can also change the color, you can change the contrast, you can change the brightness. And all of those settings can now be grouped together as an activity. And so you might have a different activity for reading the back of a package or a pill bottle than you would for reading a restaurant menu across the room. So I'm really glad to see that these settings groupings are coming. They're still not transferable across iCloud or anything like that. But when I complain about something that Apple does, and then I come back and they've addressed it in some way, I like to give them a little credit, Apple Watch integration. This is really interesting because Apple has continued to, they've created an assistive touch feature for Apple Watch that makes it possible for somebody who might have trouble tapping the Apple Watch because they have a motor disability. There are ways to get around that. There are ways you can actually sort of manipulate your hand and your wrist in a way that the watch can understand if you have assistive touch enabled. With iOS 16, they've added a few new gestures, but the most interesting thing they've done is something called Apple Watch mirroring. And what that is you essentially can put your Apple Watch screen on your phone. Why would you want to do that? because the phone has switch control and it has assistive touch and it has all these features for somebody with a motor disability that the watch doesn't directly have. And you might either be able to see or manipulate better on your phone with those features enabled than you could on your watch. And the next question you might ask is, well, then why bother having an Apple Watch if it's difficult for you to use? Well, there's a lot of wheelchair specific fitness out there. There's a lot of health benefits that the Apple Watch is providing, whether it's sensors or heart rates or fall detection, any of those kinds of things that are something that somebody with a physical disability might want to use. They just might not be able to use it the way somebody who has typical physical and motor capabilities use it. So I think mirroring is a really clever feature. And then the last one I want to talk about, and I don't know much about this personally, I've never used it, but I'll just tell you it's really cool and people seem to like it. It's called Buddy Controller. It's for gaming, and it allows somebody to play a game with somebody with a disability, to play a game with the assistance of someone else. The buddy uses a game controller and can manipulate some of the actions while the person with the disability does what they're able to do. And so you can essentially play a game you couldn't play with assistance. And people seem to be, comes in the wake of Microsoft created an accessible game controller a few years back that's been extremely popular. A lot of games on the console side have gotten much more accessible. There's really been a move toward accessible gaming lately, and Apple has sort of joined that bandwagon in iOS 16, which is pretty cool. See, I did what I always do. I jumped my slides a little bit, but we still got some stuff on here we can talk about. Let's talk about door detection. I mentioned people detection in Magnifier and for voice server users, where you can actually identify people in your environment. Well, door detection extends that so that you can, as a blind person, tell whether there is a door in the environment, whether it's open, what kind of a door it is, whether it has a sign on it. So the example I always give is, like, let's say you're traveling independently. You've used your phone to call a Lyft or an Uber. You get to your destination, you thank the driver, you rate them, you get out of your cab, and then you want to go to the front of the building. Well, you need to find where the door is. You don't want to get hit by it. You want to know whether there's a sign or a room number on the door. A door detection that's available through Magnifier will use AI and machine learning to identify the existence and the presence of, and the existence and the state of that door. And that, frankly, I think for a lot of people is even more useful than people detection. The only bummer is you have to have a pro phone or a pro iPad to use it. There's this unfortunate pairing of LiDAR, which is a feature that's used by the high-end cameras with these accessibility features, which means that there are plenty of people who might not have a reason to get an iPhone Pro or Pro Max because they don't use the camera, they might be blind, but because door detection exists, I know several people who are like, yeah, I'm going to pony up for an iPhone Pro. Would they like the larger screen as well? In some cases, yes. But so it's a little hobby horse of mine. I think it's a bummer that the LiDAR isn't available in at least a couple of the slightly lower end phones, if only so that accessibility stuff could be more widely available. Live captions. You might have heard of this as a mainstream feature. The idea is that just as here in Zoom or in Teams or any video conferencing system, there are automated captions that can be enabled so that you can see what's being spoken. And there is a lot of variance in how reliable and how good those captions are. But Apple has this really ambitious thing in iOS and Mac, where basically it will generate captions for almost any audio you can create. So you could be listening to a podcast on your phone or on your Mac, and iOS it's in beta now. If you find it in settings, it will remind you that it's in beta. And I don't know exactly when they're planning to release it for sure, but they announced it several months ago, and it is available to you. But if you turn it on, basically any audio that plays from your phone, you can get a set of captions that are machine generated. And I have not found them to be perfect. A lot of people are very skeptical of them. A lot of people I know who are deaf or hard of hearing and who use these captions a lot, not Apple specifically, but these kinds of captions, they particularly talk about YouTube, do not like them because they're not they're not accurate. It's obviously not as good as, closed captioning on a professional, television program or something like that. But it's interesting that it exists, and it's interesting that it exists in so many different places. It's not just Zoom or not just Teams you're not relying, or FaceTime even. You're not relying on the app. The operating system has said, all right, we've got enough horsepower in here. We're going to try and make, live captions a thing. So it kind of remains to be seen. My experience so far has not been great, but it's also been, I'm still in that sort of honeymoon stage where it's cool that it can do it. And my expectations are not super high, nor am I somebody who's going to depend on this feature. So for me, it's just fun right now. Custom sound recognition is an interesting one. I mentioned that if you're, well, I don't think I talked about sound recognition very much at all, actually. In iOS 15, we got this thing called sound recognition, which if you turn it on, it will listen, your device, your iPad or your phone will listen for a certain sounds that you have checked on a list. And I think there are about 15 of them in the original incarnation in iOS 15. So running water, a dog barking, a baby crying, a doorbell, sort of common sounds. And whenever any of those sounds occur in the environment, then the ones that you selected, your phone will flash an alert. So somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing could get an alert when their baby is crying, when there's somebody at their door. Well, in iOS 16, there's custom sound recognition. So a sound that isn't on that list of 15, like say a rice cooker, or your my rice cooker has sort of a do charm thing that it does. Or if your doorbell or your washing machine or some other device in your home makes a sound that isn't addressed, you can basically train your device to know that sound. And then when it hears it, it will show you a visual alert. So you can know when your rice cooker is done or when your washer is done, when your dryer is done. And again, AI based, really cool. And, it's one of those ones that I complained about last year and said, wouldn't it be great if there were custom sounds? And now there are. So I can't claim credit, but I can be excited about it. So voiceover, see, I really did jump a lot of my slides. I'm sorry about that. But voiceover voices and languages, we talked about that with eloquence and with the new languages. Siri pause management. This is one where if you're maybe you have a speech difficulty, or maybe you just have a speech cadence that Siri doesn't like, you can basically tell Siri how long to wait. Maybe you have a stutter. If you're a little slow in speaking, tell Siri to wait a little longer for you before it tries to do what it is that you've asked, so that hopefully that will make it possible to get your commands out effectively. I haven't really used this, so I don't know how well it works. It's a good idea. Voice control spelling mode, and I'm sorry, I'm just racing through these. There are a bunch of them. The voice control spelling mode is basically it's an enhancement to we got better dictation features in general in iOS 16. In voice control in the past, you could dictate and say words or whole sentences and have them manipulated. Now you can spell things out and have custom spellings or maybe abbreviations or that sort of thing. So it's just an enhancement to voice control. Activities for magnifier I talked about. I really did jump my slides. I hate when I do that. I've done all these. Okay. Well, let me talk about, the last thing I'll talk about is takeaways about accessibility. Whenever I read an article in Mac Rumors or 9 to 5 Mac or any place where we have how to do stuff in iOS or Mac OS, we always see these things that say secret features, hidden features. You know where those features almost always are? Accessibility. They're not secret or hidden features. They're just features that a lot of people don't know exist or don't need for themselves personally. So that's sort of the way we do to get clicks, which is kind of a bummer, because for people who use these accessibility features, often the existence of these features is what makes it possible to have an iPhone and to use it. The first 2 years that iPhone existed, you didn't have VoiceOver, you didn't have Zoom, you didn't have dark mode, you didn't have any of these kinds of features. And I couldn't use an iPhone. And there are a lot of people who were in that situation. And then that all changed in 2009 when we got these features. So I kind of bristle when I see secret or hidden features, because a lot of these features, for the people who use them, they're just as important as any feature that you rely on a daily basis. So yeah. Web accessibility is a thing too. If you are making websites in your life, or if you're encountering websites, there are things that web developers can do usually to make them inaccessible by using, whether it be JavaScript or whether it be, Flash is not a thing anymore, but people create interfaces that make websites complicated and hard for screen readers to parse. And there is a whole series of guidelines that developers are supposed to use so that their websites will stay accessible to people who use all kinds of screen readers, because screen readers are designed to read accessible websites. And so this is just my pitch that if you're involved in any sort of, website building, learn what you can about web accessibility and what you can do to make sure that you're not causing inaccessibility. It's not so much that you have to know how to make an accessible website. You have to know what makes it inaccessible so that you don't accidentally do that. And there's a lot of information out there. There are a lot of people out there who can help you if this is something that if you're involved in making websites. There are really simple things you can do, like using alt text in image. Alt text is just an HTML tag, and so you create a caption for an image, for example, and you say, "This is my dog" as the caption. In an alt text scenario, and you might say a basset hound lying on a rug with his tongue hanging out, or something like that. Because what alt text does that a caption doesn't is it tells you the context of the picture. It tells you the mood of the picture. This person is happy. These people are angry at one another. These people are protesting. These people have political signs, whatever it is. And so alt text is designed to give information to somebody who can't see or interpret an image. And if you're using it, and if you're adding images on a website or on social media, if you can find a way to add alt text, you're going to make your website that much more accessible to somebody who comes across it and doesn't just want to see image, 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 image. Well, what is that image? It's so easy to just make it easy for somebody who doesn't have vision to understand what's happening. A really good example of this, and they did this far more artfully than most people do, but it's so cool that they did, was when the Webb telescope images came out a few months back. NASA had some professional writers create incredible art texts that describe these beautiful images from space. And they're just like poetic works of art. And again, you don't have to do that. But the fact that those alt text representations existed meant that everybody who loves space, even people who are blind, can share in the fun. So that's my pitch for alt text. The last couple of things, and I'd say here in terms of social media, that's absolutely true in terms of Twitter. Like if you post an image, Twitter clients now give you the ability to add alt text. And again, you don't have to be a poet, but it does help to say, this is a picture of my cat Norbert, and he is a cream tabby, and he has his foot on a mouse. And so that's what my alt text for my little Zoom image would say. And again, don't when you have text that you want to transmit, don't put it as a screenshot image, because somebody with text recognition on their iPhone can get to it, but it's a couple steps. And so if you can avoid that in your Twitter posts or your social media posts, think of text as text and images, I guess. Images as images would be my sort of pitch to you. And so there's just a few things you can do to maybe enhance accessibility out there in the real world. And as I stop for any questions that you might have, these are the plugs for all the things I do. These are websites. There's my book and Texas Standard, which I hope you'll listen to, and various podcasts if you're into that. So I want to say thanks very much for having me. This has been hopefully interesting for you guys. It's been a lot of fun for me to put together. And if anybody has any questions about any of this, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for joining us, Shelly.
My pleasure.
I'm looking forward to trying a lot of these new things out. I'm visually impaired myself, so.
Cool. I hope you enjoy them.
I feel like I will. In fact, I know I will.
I've already used a bunch of them, but there's more I could be using.
Hi, Shelly, this is Jeff. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I'm actually on the other side. I am a developer quality assurance for a bank, and I quickly learned some of the items you're talking about. I realized how powerful it is. On the flip side, though, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. It's just dramatically increased our testing time on a lot of our products. So, but I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. Because you want to serve as much of the population as you can. But getting it all right is not trivial. Just throw that out there.
I think some of the challenge, and I don't know, you're in the quality assurance chain, so you may not have control of the things like the initial design of a product, but people who are, and I'm not one of these, but people who are accessibility experts in terms of building products and even building websites, what they typically say is building accessibility in from the start is the best way to make it less taxing on developers. I'm married to a developer, and I know he's been through this too, and he cares about accessibility as much as anybody. But when you get down to the end and you're asked to bolt accessibility on, it's a real challenge. And that's a problem of design, not a problem of, at the end trying to bolt it on. It's a problem of the folks who didn't do the due diligence in the first place. So I'm sympathetic to that. But I also think, and I know that I hate to sort of put it this way, but there also are requirements under the ADA that, especially for financial institutions and government and entities that serve the public in really critical ways, that make it imperative that people focus on accessibility. And again, if that's done at the design and architecture phase, that's a whole lot easier than if you're having to sort of backpedal and account for it. And I'm sympathetic, but there are ways around it that probably are above a lot of our pay grades.
Yeah, I mean, so I just want to make sure I'm clear. I think it's something we need to do. I just I definitely think it's something we should do. I don't want to come across as that we shouldn't do it. I guess all I'm saying is it takes time, and like you said, it's another ball you gotta have in the air when you're juggling to write the code. And everything you said about accessibility is also what they say about security. But you
And
see
the
that
good
getting
thing about it, is there are experts out there, and they're always available.
right. This is true. Yeah, but thanks for the presentation. I learned quite a few things I can try out when I'm testing.
Thanks a lot. I was not aware of the breadth of the accessibility options that were available. So I really appreciate the presentation, and hope we can have you again, Shelly.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Please don't be a stranger.
I
haven't seen you in more than 15 years. So yeah, I'm sure you don't remember me, but
who are you? I can't
Mary
tell.
Ward. It's
hello.
Mary
How are
Ward.
you?
I was on that
Yeah. Nice to see you.
Metro thing. Yeah, it's been a long time. I'm a lot older.
As we all are.
No, wonderful presentation.
Thank
I'm
you.
still a voiceover user.
Awesome. Do you have your
Actually,
iPhone? I assume you're an iPhone user since
I
you've
have
got
an iPhone. I do not have one of the pros.
Yeah.
I haven't really gotten on board yet with those with the higher end, great big, huge, humongous, bigger than my computer type of phone yet. But as they integrate more of those features and they get more to a level where I feel like I'm going to need them, I probably will switch to one of those.
Well, they're all getting bigger now. They don't make they hardly even make small ones anymore. The minis are going away. I mean, even the iPhone, the 14 Plus, is just like, it's a big phone. It doesn't have all the pro features, but it's ginormous. And I guess the advantage for blind folks is people who use Braille screen input, which I don't, but
Yeah, I haven't used it in a while, but a lot of blind people use the Braille screen input, and you need a little bit of
nice on a bigger
wiggle room
screen
for that. Sorry, I didn't know you couldn't see who it was.
No, because the y'all's little squares are over on the my slides are taking up most of my screen. So
your slides are,
In fact,
but that's a real good presentation.
Well, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing. If I figure if you want the links, you probably have them by now. So anyway, there we go. I hate when Zoom is not treating me the way it should treat me, because
I think there's two of us here who have, maybe we're two of the 5 people who bought the 13 mini.
I know people who like the 13 mini. I got a 13.
No, I do too.
And I didn't get a mini. I got my mom an SE too, and she's one of those people that I think home button is still a useful thing. I know that's another thing. A lot of blind folks still have SEs, SE
Yeah.
2020s and the like,
Just-
because they find the home button easier than the sort of compound gestures to flick up.
Yeah, I have a friend that's like that.
I like I really miss having Touch ID. I wish that we had an
Mhm.
option for that, but I wouldn't really want the home button back. Like having it on the side button would be okay, but
Choices, I agree. Like it took me a long time to sort of make friends with Face ID. I didn't really talk about that, but so for blind users, if for those of you who haven't really thought about this, a lot of folks with blindness either don't have eyes or are not able to focus the way Face ID wants
Right.
you to. And so there's a feature called require attention that you can turn off or on depending on whether you're able to make Face ID work for you as a blind person. And with that off, would theoretically be a little easier for somebody to pick your phone up and pass it across your face and gain access to it. So as a blind user, you have to decide whether that's something that you want to do.
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I know a lot of blind people who had trouble with Face ID initially, but kind of made peace with it. Like once
Right,
it's
that's
hard to
kinda
train
why.
it initially because you can train it with VoiceOver, which is a super interesting feature. And Apple does, the fit and finish that Apple manages to do, where they actually say,
Mhm.
okay, we have Face ID. Let's make it so that a VoiceOver user, it tells you
Yeah,
to turn
they
your
did
head,
do a
lift
good
it up
job of that.
left, that sort of thing. But for a lot of blind people, Face ID was a challenge initially. And so a lot of them just said, you know what, I'm going to stick with the iPhone SE because it has Touch ID and
Yeah,
a
I
home
understand
button.
that. But my other issue with it is that it took away one of my preferred way of using the phone is to use it from inside my purse, inside my pocket, and never take it out.
Mhm.
I don't, why should I take it out? Don't have to see the screen ever. But if I want to unlock it, I do have to, unless I want to type in the ID.
Mhm.
And so I
Right.
kind of felt like that was kind of a small little advantage I had, but it was one that I really liked. Now it's gone. It doesn't make me not want the phone, and I haven't stuck with the SE. I don't really want to use, I don't want the home button back. I just kind of wish that I had the choice.
Well, and there's always rumors that, I think they're probably going away. There were rumors for a couple of years that you
Yeah.
might get a phone that would have both. And
That
I
would have been
think that's
nice.
less likely now.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, I think so
So
too.
it's like,
I
I
think so
think that
too.
ship has sailed.
I think it has. I still, I love the new phone, and it has so many other features, and there's, they really have put a lot of effort into making sure that even I can set up Voice ID now, and I'm as spatially challenged as a blind person can get. So, and I was able to set it up. Maybe I had it on the third try, but I was eventually able to do it. So it's a good device, and some of those new features are really amazing.
Great. Well, thanks again, everybody, for having me. This was a lot of fun, and especially it's fun to
Thank you.
talk to a hometown crowd. So
Oh yeah.
Don't be a stranger.
all right. Well, I will I'll do my best to come back.
Thank you, Shelly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Good night.
Thank you.